Join us on another exciting adventure of Exertus.
Back to Northern California and Sonora, where Nymza originally brought their Prussians before they went to Bariloche. In the midst of the redwoods, you'll find all sorts of stories of flying machines. This is actually where they filmed Endor, the Ewoks from Return of the Jedi. With the advent of drilling, electromagnetic memory, these airships had sophisticated ideas that we're only now starting to understand today. One of them being the electromagnetic principle of non-gravity as a wave. This is something that was theorized by Mach and used to describe the inertial force and why we don't experience it on this supposedly spinning ball. Something that the Sonora Club and the Nymza seem to shy away from as a concept. In fact, they looked at a more static universe. And looking at the earlier designs and their connections with Rosicrucianism and the Hermetics, we see that the polarized magnets are represented not only by virgins but also by the duality of the generative-progenerative force. There are a lot of absurd drawings that I don't completely understand if they were intentional or if this was just a joke, because I can't imagine that anyone really thought this was going to fly. But maybe there are some things I'm missing. In fact, looking at the Da Vinci flying machine, which is the same design as Barney Rubble's from the Flintstones, the flying propeller actually spins with a certain amount of assistance from the coils. Those wheels actually function as gears, and it must be really good for your core and abs. But even as the Flintstones goes on, they move towards this glider technology, which even to this day, physicists will tell you there's a debate about how planes fly. I mean, I know some people will argue that we understand how flight works, and I can see the logic, but there really are questions that remain to be asked. For instance, inertia and drag. Are you really falling up? But recently there's been a major effort to re-educate pilots because our understanding of flight from the 1960s to now has changed dramatically. It seems as if, and research this for yourself, there is some unexplained phenomenon, and it has to do with electrostatic. And this explains a lot about the black bell when you start looking at the original generative cone. I think the generator cone is a better term anyway, because what is it doing? It's taking a spiral. The torsion tension field is being created. Electrostatic is being stored within the cone, and the metal is causing polarization within the substrate, then causing ions to push off the metal, lifting the metal off the ground. This would take a certain amount of energy, an alternating current that was very powerful. But imagine it connected to a coil to a hydroelectric power plant, and all of a sudden it makes a bit more sense. In fact, if all you wanted to do was have wired crafts, it'd be very easy to have electromagnetic crafts powered with a coil coming right out of the river. Of course, it would only be able to fly a certain distance. The entropy would cause a certain amount of loss in that cable. No matter how big and despite any amount of insulation, there's just loss. But this is why it makes sense to have generators, cell battery storage, pulsating electricity, direct current voltage, which is what USB uses, as well as cyclic alternating current, the arguably safer system invented by Nikola Tesla. And these water power plants are fiercely powerful. In fact, there's really no need for anything else around the planet. We could pretty well live off nothing but hydroelectric power plants. In fact, in the desert, where there are geothermal plants, even there, we're finding hydroelectric steam is being used underground. And these plants power some of the most impressive military experimental research facilities, not just Roswell, but also is included this power plant in Hamburg, which ran cable cars in the 1800s, had power and communication lines. Exists even to this day, though it's been through a lot, and a lot of the material has been stolen since World War II. It had been recently refurbished and is fully operational again, producing geothermal power and steam that runs the entire district, most of the central north of Germany. And there are a number of underground facilities nearby as well. All of this natural, renewable energy forced by alternating current as opposed to the solar cell's piezoelectricity, which only functions during the day, whereas these function day and night for decades or centuries. It is thought that the last human monument to be observable after everything fades away will be the Hoover Dam. So what is the deal with atomic radiation and energy, and why is it so important? Why is there such a hysteria about its danger? And what is the truth? Well, it seems like that's what they were looking into with the generator cone, is to find out how alternating current and electromagnetism function. And eventually the same technology made its way into the United States, from the Aero Club to the Kecksberg, Pennsylvania black bell. This time a slightly more innocuous bell, however, swirled in the insignias of the occult, the crucifix, the moon, and other lucky charms, and used for a many great deal of things, but particularly famous for the legend of being installed in basements to power buildings. The thought was, when these were attached to the Edison-style motors and tethered to a 13-story tower, these revolving spinners inside of the bells would produce enough inertia to produce a sort of electromagnetic fuel cell, working entirely off of static and potential electricity. Which is cool, but then again, of course, you couldn't fly that. But when you think about it, you can see how it could be attached to a rocket-sized something that could. And there's an old saying to follow the money, and you can see from the Prussians in the 1850s how the German banker industrialists, Kuhn, Loeb and Company, as well as German-American banks and investors, funded both World War II, but also the military contracted companies that made it possible. And a number of these were independent American contractors. In fact, Howard Hughes, who received nearly $1 billion to make his metal aircraft technology, was just one eccentric lunatic of many. Government contracts for organizations such as the Sonora Aero Club and Nymza for research into the most alluring of subjects, including anti-gravity, found their ways into the hands of eccentric inventors such as Andrews, Tillman, Dolbear, and that's just some of the companies, because you have to think about all the ones around the world. Because remember, these guys who came from perhaps Prussia ended up in everywhere from Botswana to Toronto, Mexico City, Buenos Aires, Shreveport, Sydney, Australia, all places with large Prussian colonial populations. And it's kind of interesting thinking about the Prussians in this way, because if this is a group of nationalists whom have a legacy of being proud but nomadic, and so they don't really have any state of their own except for the state that they conquer. So in a sense, it's a fluctuating and liquid and very plastic state, though the culture seems to adapt over time and become more and more sophisticated. They are a scattered nomadic people, only looking for a homeland to call their own. And until then, are scattered amongst the many peoples across the earth. They even wear funny hats. And you have to wonder what sort of a psychology these men possessed, having this ideal of a state remaining ever stateless, in a time when, in the 1850s, the state was controlled by royal families they didn't agree with, and they were often forced to fight for these families against their own brothers. It was a time of mythology and folk magic, and these allies across the lands would study from each other as contemporaries. Many universities shared research because of the printing presses, pioneered by another Germanic, Johann Gutenberg, a very important man to the modern age, but also a dude with a rad hat and a gnarly black metal beard. He kind of looks like a cross between the lead singer from A System of a Down and Keanu Reeves. But there were so many Prussian inventors that invented so many things, let alone aviation, and motion pictures, and electrical media technology. Alois Senfelder, and Daniel Schwenter, and other dudes, seemingly not Germanic, but hardcore Slav, inventing all kinds of crazy things, from flying machines to things much more intense, like the metric tensor torsion field, which is, in differential geometry, the notion of torsion, and a manner of characterizing a twist or screw of a moving frame around a curve. The twist-torsion curved space-time is really just a way of looking at the analog range between the binary of separation and connection, and in that identity of union, scaling that analog through a metric, defined as the tensing and loosening of that torsion field. This stuff used to be beyond the capacity of physicists to understand, because it just didn't play well with the obsolete metrics of the 20th century.
Is this airing right now?
Recent talk.
This program is coming to you via Relay 2 satellite. The space
at a speed of over 17,000 miles per hour.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarian.
Recent Tartarian.
Exertus.